counties from entering into agreements with ICE that allow ICE to use local resources, whether those resources be officers or county jails, to help carry out immigration enforcement duties. You guys, if this sounds familiar, it's because you've probably heard of it before. These are called 287G agreements. They've been talked about a lot in the headlines lately. And there are several counties in New York that have these agreements. And Governor Hochul is essentially saying enough. She introduced this policy idea last week, again called the Local Crimes Act. And she said, and it would ban these agreements, and it would also, as she says, and she suggests, it would prevent a large-scale ICE operation like the one we've seen in Minnesota from happening here in New York. Governor Hochul, she went on MS Now's Morning Joe this morning and talked about this at length, essentially saying that she does not like what's unfolded in Minnesota. She doesn't want to see it happen here in New York, and she thinks this policy idea is the best way to go about preventing it. She also said that she feels local officers should be focused on local crimes, hence the namesake of this bill. She thinks that any sort of immigration enforcement duties take away from what local officers do, and she also feels like it erodes trust between local community members and local officers. I do want to point out, though, that her bill, as she says, and she insists, that it would not keep local officers from cooperating with the feds on criminal investigations. She has sort of doubled down and really been adamant to say that even if this bill passes, local officers will still be allowed to collaborate with the feds, but only if there is a criminal investigation at play. Going even a step further, this would mean ICE agents have to show a judicial warrant if they're looking to carry out immigration enforcement here in New York State. I've got my producer here with me, and if you guys have any questions about this, feel free to share them on the live stream. Do we have any?
Nothing yet. One thing that you can point out, too, is I don't know if you saw this from colleague Bill Malugin yesterday. He put out an email in West Virginia. They also have the 287G, and they rounded up a bunch of migrants, no incidences at all, no clash with law enforcement.
So that gets me to that's a great point. That gets me to the other side of this argument. So Democrats, which Governor Kathy Hochul is a Democrat, they have been arguing that ICE operations are leading to chaos, leading to violence, and that's one of the reasons why they want to push forward these anti-ICE proposals. But Republicans counter that viewpoint, and they argue when there is no collaboration, that's when you're seeing these clashes and chaos. Both sides point to Minnesota to bolster their argument, but those are the two schools of thoughts that we have at play here. Seth mentioned an operation with local officers and ICE in Virginia that led to some illegal migrants being taken into custody. Well, we can also look to operations that we've seen in Florida between ICE and local officers there. One of them that was pretty prominent was Operation Tidal Wave or Operation Tidal Surge. I'm not sure of the exact name at the moment, but local officers there touted at the time that it was a pretty fruitful operation between state resources and ICE that led to removing criminal offenders from jurisdictions in Florida. So now moving on from New York, I think we may have a question.
Yep. Is this really about immigration policy, or is it more about state versus federal power? It's a good question.
That is a great question. State lawmakers argue that it's a bit of both. We've heard Governor Kathy Hochul use some pretty strong words against the Trump administration within recent days as she's talked about these policy proposals. And when it comes to immigration, she says that she wants to remove criminal offenders from the streets, but she doesn't like how the Trump administration is carrying out immigration enforcement. So for some of these politicians, they would argue that it's a bit of both.
Another question coming in. Have there been protests outside of Hochul's office?
A great question. Not that we've seen. We haven't heard of any large-scale protests outside of Governor Hochul's residence at this time.
But I think one thing that you can point out, CB, is that you and I extensively, we've covered these protests mostly on weekends where we've seen tens or thousands of people that have gathered. The one a couple weeks ago up by the plaza when we marched all the way down, to the library, and then we saw upwards of, our NYPD source told us, 5,000 people?
Yeah. I think, my producer Seth brings up a good point. There is a lot of political pressure that elected leaders on both sides feel with the immigration issue. Governor Hochul is up for re-election this November. And as you guys probably know, Democrats have sort of been divided between the more moderate wing of the party and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And we've seen other issues like women's sports become a topic where, sometimes moderate Democrats have been forced to answer, the demands of the more progressive wing of the party. Now I think we're at a moment where we have to ask, has immigration become one of those issues? Is Governor Kathy Hochul answering the calls of the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which wants to see hard lines drawn against ICE agents? And seemingly from this new proposal she's putting forward, the Local Cops, Local Crimes Act, she's trying to draw that hard line against ICE agents in New York State, while also saying that she still wants to remove criminal offenders, but only when there's a judicial warrant that can be presented.
Another question coming in. Has the Trump administration reacted to Hochul's statement?
I have not seen any response from the Trump administration to Hochul's policy proposal. However, we do know that President Trump, he is pretty active on Truth Social, and if we have a news briefing today from the White House, although I haven't seen one, if we have a news briefing, more information could come out. I should point out, though, that in mid-January, President Trump threatened to cut off funding from sanctuary cities and their respective states beginning February 1st. We've not seen an update with that. But as you guys probably know, New York City is a sanctuary city. And we asked Mayor Mamdani today about whether there was an update on if New York City was going to have funding cuts. And here's what he said. Let me pull up the quote. So Mayor Mamdani, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said that he's not heard of any additional information now that the date has come and gone. And he said, we will continue to stand up for this city and continue to make clear that our values and our laws are not bargaining chips, and we will stand up for them if they are ever threatened. So I'm also monitoring to see whether we get an update from the White House on President Trump's mid-January threat to cut funding from sanctuary cities. Again, he made that. He said that would happen come February 1st, but we haven't seen an update with that. And that sort of brings me to New York City, because Hochul's policy proposal doesn't change anything for New York City, right? The NYPD has always been barred from helping with civil immigration enforcement because of sanctuary policy. So no changes with the NYPD. But New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani is set to sign the Safer Sanctuary Act, and that would fortify New York City's sanctuary laws. It would also ban ICE from operating an office on Rikers Island or any New York City correctional facility. So while New York City has always been really clear that it's a sanctuary place, now we see Democratic leaders doubling down on that idea and trying to strengthen it here in the Big Apple.
One more coming in. If ICE isn't notified about certain offenders, who is accountable if someone reoffends?
Well, that is one thing. That's a great question, and that is something that the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE, has been pointing out, is that if sanctuary areas, cities and states, don't want to help out with immigration enforcement, DHS has been saying that these jurisdictions are dropping the ball because they argue violent criminal offenders will be re-released out on the streets, and then ICE will have to go look for them. And DHS Assistant Secretary, Tricia McLaughlin, she responded to Governor Hochul's policy idea, in a statement. And she said that when sanctuary areas don't want to help, it requires ICE agents to have a more visible presence to go out and look for people with criminal records, find them, and arrest them and take them back into custody.
One more coming in. Will this be met with lawsuits? Can the federal government sue New York over this?
These are awesome questions. I think, let me tell you this. The Democrats control both chambers of New York's state legislature. So it is very likely that Hochul's policy idea will pass. And I would not be surprised if we start seeing lawsuits being brought against sanctuary jurisdictions for these sorts of policies. We know that Attorney General Pam Bondi has had some very strong words for elected leaders in these places if they don't want to play ball, and if leaders of sanctuary areas decide to encourage people to block and encourage people to block and fight against ICE agents. So I would not be surprised if we see litigation that comes forward. Do we have anything else at this point?
I think we have one more coming in. Just bear with me. Would the Trump administration try to cut funding from New York?
So we were just talking about that, and I'm glad you brought that back up. So in mid-January, President Trump threatened to cut funding from sanctuary jurisdictions by February 1st. We are, we're looking to see whether the White House provides an update to that, because we know February 1st was yesterday, so that date has come and gone. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani was asked about this today, and he said he hasn't heard of any update. But while also adding that he'll continue to stand up for the city and make clear, this is a quote from him, make clear that our values and our laws are not bargaining chips. And so going back to Mayor Mamdani, he is set to sign the Safer Sanctuary Act. And just to recap that one more time, it would ban ICE from operating any office at any New York City correctional facility. That Safer Sanctuary Act also fortifies other sanctuary city policies. So we see New York City currently is trying to double down on its sanctuary status. And how did the Safer Sanctuary Act come into play? Well, last year, New York City tried to pass it, but the former mayor, Eric Adams, he vetoed it. And so this past week, New York City councilors voted to override that veto, and that's why that bill is now headed for Mamdani's desk for the final signature.
I think it was it 44-7 or 42-7 from the city council?
The city councilors voted 44-7 in favor of overriding that veto. And we know Mayor Adams vetoed this bill last year because he says, he was in support of the immigration enforcement operations. He also wanted to open up an ICE office on Rikers Island, but he was ultimately blocked by a judge, so he wasn't able to do that. At the time, New York City councilors accused him of selling out to the Trump administration because, as you guys probably know, the Trump administration's DOJ had criminal charges against Adams dropped. We may not have any more questions, but I think there's a lot more to watch with this story. The big takeaway for you guys to know is that what we're watching happen across the country are Democratic leaders trying to fortify sanctuary policies against ICE operations. Democrats argue that the ongoing immigration crackdown is causing chaos on American streets and eroding trust between the public and local law enforcement. And they point to Minneapolis, Minnesota as an example, and the deaths of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. Republicans, on the other hand, also point to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and argue that when there is no collaboration, that's when you see chaos unfold. And they argue that if you had sanctuary leaders trying to find ways to work on immigration enforcement, everyone would be a lot safer. I'm not sure we have any more questions at this time, but I would definitely tell you guys to follow this space, follow this story. If Governor Hochul's legislation passes, it would become one of several states across the country that has now banned 287G agreements, and we know DHS has responded to say that when these agreements are banned, it makes their jobs harder and it causes ICE to have a more visible presence in the community. So DHS says if you want ICE agents to be able to do their work and do it in a less public manner, partner with us. Democrats are saying no thank you, no go. We disagree. And the Safer Sanctuary Act for New York City, that is essentially the law of the land now, but now it just needs Mayor Mamdani's signature. Okay, you guys. Well, thanks for joining me on this social media live for Fox News. I appreciate you guys watching and asking great questions. Continue to follow this space as we track how elected Democrats are trying to fight back against ICE and immigration enforcement. And we're also tracking what the response from DHS is, who argues that the worst of the worst are being taken from American streets and that these anti-ICE proposals only make Americans less safe. Watch this space.
You're clear. That was good. I know. This is only the second one.